call the September 9th, 2024 meeting of the Town of Cicero Zoning Board of Appeals to order. Ms. Robeson, please call the roll.
Here.
Here.
Mr. Vick.
Here.
Mr. May.
Here. Here. Please take note of the fire exits in the front and the rear of this room. At this time, please silence all cell phones and pagers. Please note that tonight's meeting is being streamed on YouTube and is also being recorded. Please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Okay. Has everyone read the minutes of the August 5th, 2024 meeting?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. That motion, any changes?
I had a change that
Yes.
I sent on.
Okay, very good. Do I have a motion to approve?
Motion, oh, go ahead.
Motion to approve.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, please call the roll.
I'll abstain since I was absent.
Yes, to the motion.
Mr. Vick.
Yes to the motion.
Mr. May.
Yes to the motion.
Mr. Stanton.
I'll abstain since I was absent. The Cicero Town Board acknowledges the importance of full public participation at all public meetings, and therefore we urge all who wish to address those in attendance to please come to the microphone located in the front of the room. At this time, I will make a motion that all actions taken tonight are type 2 actions and have a negative that is no impact on the environment unless otherwise indicated. Do I have a second?
Second.
By Mr. Beck, when you're ready.
Yes, the motion.
Ms. Luckett.
Yes to the motion.
Mr. Vick.
Yes to the motion. Yes to the motion.
Mr. Stanton.
Yes to the motion. I'll briefly review the process for tonight's meeting for the benefit of those present that have never been before the Zoning Board of Appeals. Each applicant will have an opportunity to describe their project. The board will then ask questions about the project. I will then open a public hearing where people will be able to speak for or against the proposed variance. The applicant will then be given the opportunity to respond to public input and provide additional information. Board members will be allowed to ask follow-on questions. Board will openly discuss amongst ourselves the 5 factors that contribute to the final decision. Please note that this board does not have a pre-agenda meeting, so there is no prior discussion of cases outside of this meeting. And then finally, a motion will be made, either approving or denying the requested variance, seconded, and acted upon. Our first case tonight is an application for property on 8874 Lombardi Drive. The owner is Gregory Ryder. This is a continuation of a previous meeting, and please note we have left the public input section open. So if you'd come up and address the board, please. So since you were here last time, we had asked that you provide us with a little bit of documentation of potential alternatives, or at least some backup as to why you came along upon the solution that you did. I see you've given that to us. I've had the time to go through it. I'm assuming everybody else has too. So if you would just walk us through that, please.
Yes, absolutely. So good evening, board members and supporting staff. I appreciate all of your support in coming out tonight, as well as some neighbors and loved ones that have also come to speak on our behalf. So for those that maybe are new tonight on the board, I know one is here tonight. So just to reintroduce myself, I'm Greg Ryder. Me and my wife have been lifelong residents in the town of Cicero, and you know, maybe I didn't mention last time, but for a career, I am a civil structural engineer. I've been licensed in the state and practicing for the last 15 years. So just, I don't, is it worth recapping some of the last meeting, or do we want to just jump into the alternatives?
Go ahead and recap. That's fine.
Okay, so from my view, I think, when we met last time, there was agreement from the board around kind of two main pieces, which is the physical impacts, of where the proposed location is. Would not create a physical or environmental adverse impact, with the proposed location. Is there agreement there, or was there any? Feel free to challenge as I'm recapping, I guess maybe I'll say there. The board was also in agreement. The potential visual impact to the rear setback would not change if adhering to the 30-foot setback requirement, versus 24 setback as proposed. The board was also in agreement that the applicant, me, following that setback requirement, would help the adverse impact to the neighbors, meaning tucking it in more to the side does have a benefit to those neighbors. Except that the extent of that impact is where we were left of debate, right? And what those offsets are that really left us, and I appreciate the chance to come back again tonight to really show how, where we felt challenged following the setback requirements from both the side and rear properties there. I'll say it's been a learning curve for me, but do appreciate the additional time. Some of those physical impacts that I do want to make note of that maybe it's worth, if we want to start going through, we can take a look at the exhibits here. So the first, I gave two, Exhibit A and Exhibit B are really what the board had asked me to come back for tonight, which is really showing what it would take to be the full 30 feet off the side or alternatively a different view, complying with the side setbacks there. So alternative A is parallel to the sideline property here, where you'll see some pictures where I define up at the top, those white ropes. I think hopefully it made it clear to the board members, what we were trying to outline with the structure there. And then as we click through to the next picture here, you can start to see in that bottom left-hand corner, and then in the right, you see the green rope, which was really intended to show what the required setbacks are from our requirement side. So if you continue on, these are just some alternative views. This view here, I think, is worth noting that this is really from the rear property line, where it's showing this is following that side property line, where, as you see, that corner post really is equal to where that walkway is today. That I think in the next picture, we'll see what that actually does from a spacing requirement, that adhering to that 30 feet there is now creating almost equal distance on both sides of the proposed structure. That from the highlighted that, as you'll see repeated through, is just, creating to us an unnecessary safety concern by shifting that structure over, whereas, the initial proposed location was truly intended trying to tuck those utilities away and trying to make that area inaccessible and unusable to both children and guests there. The impact we talked about earlier, shifting that over, really from the rear side, whether that was shifted inwards to the proposed location versus here, wouldn't have an impact to the rear, but certainly from the neighbor's view to the side would further obstruct their view there. You'll see the next bullet, we talk about just that 15 feet. So in the proposed, it's 21 feet is what we are able to pull off when we're able to shift it into the proposed location. That when you factor in your landscaping and others that I understand, isn't critical to the decision here, but does factor in for us, would leave, a very small place that, for us, a usable space with 3 children, does impact us. And do we feel, where we do, I have a note there where could see how that's going to impact our resale value, of who's going to prefer to have something located in the middle of the property like that. So if we continue on, we can go to the next exhibit there, where this is really from the rear property line. So this is staying to the 30 feet offsets there in both corners there, which, as you see in the bottom right-hand corner, is that shift into the yard that has that, again, big impact to the usable functional space there. Again, enhancing or creating a bigger space in the back behind that. But we can click to the next picture there. So here, again, we're talking through, that side space and just creating the space around those pool utilities that are physically located there. They were part of the original approval that where to the question or comment earlier about the physical barrier, you know, if this was ever put here, this is on a wood frame, you know, could be physically moved if required, whereas these pool utilities, you know, have no way to go anywhere. So even if the town told us, you know, there was an issue with the fence or something, you know, we'd be kind of stuck with what has been already permitted and approved there. Can continue on. Here's just another view trying to show where that impact is into the functional space of the property there. So similar notes here, you know, it is a less of an impact in the back, but still creating a 10-foot area of space to allow, you know, guests and children to get into there. Again, still creating more of a visual impact. It's no longer parallel to the house, which is how we designed the pool. Really, the aesthetics of that would have a big impact on us. And I believe we've talked to the other points there, so. Moving on is just some more views, just trying to show where, you know, that shift in the back right corner, you know, can help with some of that functionality as well as eliminate some of those safety concerns that we brought up earlier there. We'll continue on. That's where we're seeing the proposed overlap there. Again, the corner that's just off the screen on the far right is meeting that 30 feet. It's this one corner here that's of concern that we're looking at. Couple more views of those. You'll see here again, it's tightened up to the utilities there, you know, that even that might not do it justice. So really the goal was trying to get it as close as we could there to keep that, you know, out of function, you know, access to the children. So this is a little bit small here. I don't know if there's an ability to zoom in at all. If not, I can certainly flip to my notes here to walk through, but
Just to be clear, alternative 3 is what you came in and talked to us about a couple months back.
that's correct.
No change.
No change. This is the proposed location. So maybe just talking about some of the challenges around that, the proposed location, as well as what we see as some of the benefits by this proposed location in comparison to the alternatives the board asked for there. So some of the challenges we're subjected to on this property is that irregular shape. You know, if we were fortunate enough to this to be a squared off property as desired, you know, that wouldn't have brought us here tonight. We do feel, you know, when it comes to the term substantial and the questions there, you know, the 6 foot compared to 30 foot in itself is not, you know, substantial, but would ask maybe as a follow-up what the definition of substantial is to the group here. But from our side, we do feel challenged that the ancillary structure requirements going from 3 feet to 30 feet is really kind of what put us in the pickle here, which we recognize is due to that desired structure, but you don't see any other alternatives in there. Where we did consider one up in the, call it top left-hand corner of the property, but based on the angles of those property lines, the pool or shed would actually be basically where the pool is proposed or was installed. That we really do feel this corner was the only corner that could work for us. So leading back to one of the other questions I know we talked about last time around self-created, I do think there was commentary that it was self-created because of our pool and patio that we chose to lay out here, which I would challenge. It's really the layout of the property that's restricting us to put a structure in of this size, which is really what our desire is based on a family with 3 children. You know, I believe it was Mr. Bick that asked me last time, was it a pool shed versus a shed? That I, you know, would challenge the code references, you know, ancillary structure such as a lawn shed with 192 square feet. That to me, this is much more than a lawn shed. I've got a lawn shed, I've got a pool shed, I've got my basement and garage overflowing, hoping this is going to be their type situation where we just, it has helped, you have helped cleanse the house a little bit where we're trying to get rid of, but in the reality, we feel we're in a modest size house with 3 kids, that this was something that was going to help us, you know, from a family size, get, you know, what we needed to be able to sustain and stay, you know, on this property. You know, for me and my wife, as you see, we'd love to be here the rest of our life, you know, that this was a piece to it. So, and just double checking over here if I missed anything. There still is impact to the hardscape that we're acknowledging. We're taking on, you know, costs here, you know, to try and accommodate, I think a lot of the questions around last time, have you compromised? Is there willingness to do that? I just do want to remind, when we factored this and looked at the alternatives, we did take some loss and factors into that, is coming at an extra expense to us. But I do think when you look at these other alternatives, it's a much more significant expense, that would be taken to meet those code requirements versus the selected variants that we're asking for. So with that, I will pause and open it up for questions.
The pinch point here that you referenced that's highlighted, you're talking about between the accessory building and your pool heater and filter. That's correct?
We have our utility box that we put out there, as well as the pool pump, the heater,
Okay.
the gas heater, piping
Yep.
for the gas pipes and
Just wanna
all of
make sure I
that.
wasn't looking in the
Yep.
place that you were referencing, that's all.
Could that be mitigated by shrubbery or a fence if need be?
Which alternative are you asking
Either one.
reference to?
You've got highlighted, gas and utility structures, and you're worried about folks walking into it. So there's a way to prevent folks from going into that, right?
I guess I don't know exactly what you're proposing as far as trying to build shrubbery to block off the utilities.
I think you were worried about, people walking through there, if I'm not mistaken, if I'm reading your comment right.
I'm creating it, when we look at, I think it would help if we look back at exhibit, I am flipping my pages here, but exhibit A. Referring to, that space that we're talking about there.
Right, and to mitigate that space, you could put a fence around that area to keep people out of it, correct?
A fence around it, you're asking?
Some sort of screening around your utilities and your pool heater.
That was not a piece that we had considered of fencing off those utilities if put over there.
No, I'm just trying to figure out how to mitigate some of the concerns that you have here, right?
Mr. Daniel, don't be afraid to, you were in on this original one, so don't be afraid to ask questions, please.
I would suspect that planting or putting anything into the ground around those utilities would be problematic because of the lines that are running
That's
through those utilities.
good observation, Mr. Vick. I'm sorry, I was still processing a little bit of, we hadn't thought about that, but I do think if you were to try fencing or some other
It would
things.
have to be a freestanding screen of some sort.
Right.
and-
I don't know if the boards propose something like that in the past for reference or.
No, not necessarily, but I, you brought up an issue of concern about people walking by it, so.
Absolutely,
Just
yeah.
trying to come up with an idea to mitigate that concern.
And I mean, just to make a fine point, excuse me, either exhibit A or exhibit B, if the applicant went with this, would require no variance. So at that point, we're out of it. But I mean, point taken, as an in-between point, some kind of screening or plantings there, assuming we're not impinging on underground lines.
Right.
That would be, that could be an acceptable solution that we can't force. So I do see that exhibit A is pretty impactful, and it looks like you wind up having quite a bit of additional room to the back property line. Just by virtue of the fact that everything's shifting down so far. What I am noting though is that with exhibit B, while you do lose a little bit of space in between your house and the structure, that corner is actually the, is that the northeast corner? Bring these things and I don't use them. This corner right here is actually a little bit, at least nominally, a little bit closer, which would kind of lend itself to that protection that you're talking about. I mean, obviously you're gaining some room back here, but it also doesn't look like it's cutting off the end of your hardscape, but not, it doesn't seem like it's as impactful as
And
the other option.
when comparing the two options, this is the worst option for us because of the aesthetics. It's completely, angled to the structure, to the existing home, the pool that wouldn't align. We do feel like even the corner those two dimensions are pointing to in the bottom right, could be a safety hazard, right in the middle of the area, creating that angle for no necessary reason that we would have a hard time aligning aesthetically as well as additional safety pieces around, forcing it into there and call it making the angle right as that, because remember, next to that 16 foot is where the fence, the entryway is to the backyard where the kids are playing in and out of there. That would be of concern of us.
Is the shed 2 stories?
No, it's got dormers on it, so it's
But there's no
space above.
Stairs in there.
It's got space above. It has a staircase, but it's not a full
More
up
storage above.
storage space is what it's intended, yes.
A lot of space. It's a big building.
You want to hand that down? Everybody else can take a look at that too. That's
Oh, yeah. I've seen that.
you've got that?
I have.
Got it. Have you considered a smaller structure to minimize the impact onto your yard?
I think this is what we talked about last time, I think, that again, we've spent a lot of time, we've hired an architect, we've put these drawings together, we've spent significant amount of money to be here in front of the board, several times now, I've tried to comply with the zoning's office, and it's been a learning curve as, through all of this, but I mean, we certainly could comply, but if I put in a standard shed, then I'm gonna put a tent behind it to pile up all the pool, sorry, not to use wrong words, but I mean, part of this was trying to put something up aesthetically pleasing that's going to hide all of our stuff, keep our things tidy from our neighbors, that if given where we're sitting and the ask to put it, continue to shift over, I do feel we would likely be stuck with putting in a standard size shed that, again, we would just end up figuring it out for the other stuff. But this was what we felt is the right size that's going to keep if you look, this isn't a simple structure. I mean, this was, pretty elaborate. We're making a huge investment to try and put something up again that we feel is going to last for me and my wife through retirement. That again is part of where do we need it today? It's trying to prepare for the future here. So.
I think we had discussed a longer, narrower building, but that would have required demolition of some of your existing.
Yeah, I mean, even this design here, I mean, we didn't mention it, but if you look, this one has
Little bit of-
significant impact to the landscaping. The longer is I don't know if you can see in the pictures, but there's actual retaining wall along the edge of the paver or, the hardscape, which is dealing with the grade change that would probably restrict or, major overhaul there. Again, and then we have all those underground utilities that
Sure.
run through that section.
Are we willing to entertain something between 24 and 30 to help mitigate the impact?
I believe that's where I was headed last time.
I know he proposed, I think A and C were 30 feet off the rear line, right? So. Not
Do
mistaken.
you mean oriented the same way that C is, but someplace between 24 and 30?
Yeah, yeah, so.
Yeah, that would make sense to me.
You understand what kind of our thought process is rather than be 24 off your rear line, maybe not 30, but something in between 24 and 30. What's your same
Ye-
orientation?
Yeah, I mean, this.
You're gonna run into the same issue of, coming into your yard a little bit, but
Not quite as much as
not
30.
quite as much though.
I mean, this is the same discussion we had last time, and I've answered, and I think I've tried to provide as much detail as I can to the board here with this, that, it's, to me, well, what's that number that makes it okay that we're still creating a bigger and bigger gap there that I just unnecessary for, whereas if we could review, the 5 questions, or the 5 driving criteria, I do think, the request at hand isn't substantial when you compare it to, the 30-foot requirement. Even seeing some of the other agenda items tonight, if I had came in initially and asked for 28, I feel like we'd be talking, maybe this one would have been accepted, so I feel it's the challenge of, we tried to get it as right as we could there and coming back to the committee, certainly. Not saying I'm open to talking through it, but I do feel challenged there, but.
Okay.
For me, it feels like maybe your lot is too small and you've used up too much area with your hardscape to build a 20 by 18-foot shed. I mean, maybe you've trapped yourself into this problem,
But
and
I'm
maybe
sorry.
you need to just build a smaller shed. That's what it feels like to me. Like maybe this lot just isn't big enough for what you want to do. And it seems like you've got a downstairs and you've got an upstairs in this shed. It's a significant amount of space. There's houses in the city that aren't as big as much space that you're asking for in your shed when you put those 2 floors together.
Yeah, and I would just challenge, so again, we brought forth our design and certainly can go back and follow, the requirement here, that will ultimately push us to the 192 or less, that is ultimately where I come to this board for a decision. But I would challenge if you could look at this without the pool and patio there, that the restrictions of the structure on the lot is based on the offset requirements and the size of the lot. So it's where I do feel it's being a bit distracted by the pool and patio, whereas when you look at the boundary lines, that is a determining factor here.
See, at least in my mind, I think I'd be much less willing to entertain this if the pool were not there. It looks like, in my opinion, it looks like there's a pre-plan here for something to happen, which is why you've got this little spur. You've got this little spur piece coming off, and I do empathize with you that having a structure of this size does create some rework that has to be done, and it's not the most optimal situation here, but I can't get past the fact that it looks like there's an in-between here that we could do, that either you don't need the variance or the variance isn't as much. I mean, to get to your question as to what is substantial, we're looking at a 20%, 20% of the 30-foot rear yard here, which, at least in my definition, if I were asked the question right now, that would be substantial, considering not just that it's the number, because again, you're asking what's the criteria on this. There's a lot of things that go into it. It's the size of the variance that you're asking for, up to and including any other potential other options that you have. Sometimes that may not be a substantial variance, but when we're seeing options here that are an in-between, I'm thinking that it is substantial.
So just to add, that to me was a question, trying to come back to the board to understand what the definition of substantial is, that that did sound a little bit ambiguous there in the description.
Well, that's because this is really a quasi judicial board here, and a lot of it is our subjective look at this. So there is no manual that you can pull out that says, you know, this is what the definition of substantial is. It's all up to how we feel you are addressing the concerns of this board, as well as the property and the size of the structure that you're trying to put on it. And I think Terry kind of said it well, that it seems like it's a very large structure to be wanting to put here.
Not small.
I think there's some wiggle room between 192 and 360. I mean, would you be, I guess, open to the idea of, I'm not saying drop it down to 192 and eliminate the need to even be here, but would you possibly be, you know, maybe into the idea of making it 16-foot wide rather than 18-foot wide?
It would all be back to the drawing board. Is that?
I'm just giving that as an example. I don't know how the rest of the board feels about that size. I'm just giving it as an example because that would reduce the variance needed by 2 feet. Well, not necessarily 2 feet, but I'd have to measure it out, but you get what I'm saying. That would reduce the variance needed right off the bat by reducing the size of the structure. And now you've dropped it down to 320 square feet, which is still significantly larger than 192.
Yeah, I do want to pull us back to the last meeting because we had a conversation. Are we talking about the design of the structure that we brought forward? Are we talking about, you know, the location of it? And if it might be helpful to refer back to the meeting minutes, but it was pretty well reinforced to me. It was around the location and not looking at adapting the structure because I mean, Mr.
right.
Bick did talk about extending it.
Yep.
And I was, you know, I'm an engineer by trade, so I'm happy, you know, there's many different variations, you know, that could be put forth that where I was struggling the last time and we kind of left it to show me 30 foot, you know, show me 30 foot. Is it 2 feet I'm talking about that then I can make those assessments to say, I want to change the structure by this. I want to change this, but you know, there's a lot of little pieces that, you know, from the design as well as the location, but the board was telling me that it wasn't to go back and look at the design of the structure. The goal was to go back and look at the location of that structure.
And that's fine. And I'm just spitballing ideas
No,
that might
right.
possibly minimize
Oh, I appreciate that.
the variance that you would need. That's all.
Yeah.
All right, why don't I, while you guys continue to think about this, why don't I continue the public hearing? Sure. You guys are all right with that? So at this time, I will continue the public hearing. Would anyone speak for this? If you want to speak for it, come up and address the board. Make sure you give your name and your address so that we can capture that for the minutes. Please.
Yeah, my name is Mike Riley and I live at 14 Broadhead Drive, Cicero, New York, 13039. All set?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm I'm obviously in favor of granting the variance. I think, again, we're talking about 6 feet. I look at the 5 criteria and we could argue all day what substantial means, but in many legal and business contexts, it could mean 80% or more. So you could argue that 6 feet is not substantial. Well, I understand your point, Mr. Chairman, that, you know, substantial could mean other things. But when you look at the property, I've been to the property, and you look at the space behind there, that's all wasted space there. So I understand it's a 30-foot setback, but that's all wasted space. So by moving the shed, you can utilize that wasted space. And you also increase the ground area, the grass area there, which is pretty small. I'm not even sure it's 16 feet. Doesn't look like it's 16 feet. But there's a lot of, you know, the activities that go on at the house. There's a lot of games. You're playing bocce ball. You've got this bouncy house. All that stuff would be jammed right in there and not be very functional as it is today. As far as the aesthetics, there's one neighbor that basically is going to see this, and it's actually a better aesthetic view by looking at the property, the way Exhibit C proposes it be structured. They actually have a better view. And I think, I think what some of you are engineers or architects, that obviously aesthetically being lined up with the house looks a lot better. It looks tilted this other way. I guess the real reason, when you look at these 5 factors, will there be an undesirable change? No. Can the benefit sought by the applicant be achieved by some other feasible method? We don't think so. Was it self-created? We could debate that all day. And will it have an adverse effect on the nearby physical environment conditions? And I think that's the biggest point. What adverse effect? And we're talking about knocking it down from 30 to 27 feet. So you still have to grant a variance under that. And I know you're trying to compromise. I get all that. But you're going from now down to 3 feet. So what have we really done? If we're going to grant it in full, unless there's some adverse impact to the community. I really am concerned about the safety hazards. I know you say you can put shrubbery there and all that, but I've seen the line and it really blocks off that pool and electrical area there. And it gets rid of the area behind where you don't have anybody going by there. So there's always a concern, kids running around the shed and all that and getting caught up in there. So to me, I think the safety concerns are very compelling. And I want to put on the record today that the safety concerns are very compelling, and it should be noted because that's a concern. But we also look at the aesthetics and everything else we go along. But again, you go back to the central point. What's the adverse impact to the community and the neighbors? There isn't anything other than the fact that we got this 30-foot setback requirement. That's all we got. And I think one of you mentioned that's supposed to be a reasonable requirement. So reasonable means that we'd be subject to some sort of interpretation. And I realize that before you grant a variance, you have to look at for an overriding reason and so forth. If you look at the safety concerns, the aesthetic concerns, and the fact as a citizen, they should have the free will to basically put a structure on the property that fits their needs, as long as it doesn't affect the neighbors or anybody else. So I think you just have to look at those circumstances, because again, we're going 30 feet, 27 feet, where are we on that thing? But if you had the opportunity to look at the property, I think you could see where it does make a difference, modifying his alternative or alternative C to B or A. It just doesn't look right, fit right, and functionality doesn't work. So I would just wish that you would, hope that you look at what the impact of the community is, and is it a big difference here, regardless if he wants a certain structure that fits. He's trying to make the best use of his land, which everybody tries to do. So we shouldn't decide whether the structure is too large or not. I understand he's violating the variance, but we should look at the adverse impact on the community.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
If I may?
Yep.
Okay, great, thank you. My name's Andrew Rawson. I am a Cicero resident. I live on Joseph Junction Road. And I'm here in support of Greg Ryder. My understanding is that Greg is requesting that 24-foot variant to build this structure for a building permit to build a shed on his property. My understanding is the requirement is 30 feet. And again, as Mr. Riley that was just up here mentioned, we're talking about 6 feet. And what would that difference be? The mention was it's 20%. Is that viewed as substantial? If we're talking about splitting the difference at 10%, et cetera, I guess that's something that needs to be heard as a Cicero resident listening to this. And what is that adverse effect? Mr. Riley made a pretty good point. One thing I'll say about myself is that, I respect laws. I imagine most of the people behind us respect laws. I respect these local ordinances. And this is actually my first time stepping foot into a meeting such as this in the Cicero Town Hall. And overall, what we're talking about is 6 feet. And I believe that by having this structure 30 feet off, you're creating that gap. We've been talking about safety. There've been mention about shrubs or mentions about fencing around the pool utilities like electrical and gas. And I think one of the biggest things that we got to look at here is the structure that is proposed is going to be providing safety to guests, to the children. It's going to be blocking traffic from walking around there. And it doesn't cause any visual effects there. It's not going to be an eyesore of a structure. There's foliage all the way back on Lake Shore where the house property line backs up. And there wouldn't be any obstructions to any of the neighbors. I know that, you know, seeing this as a fellow Cicero resident, Greg being a great neighbor and a law-abiding citizen, having him to go through these proper steps. Obviously, he's going through the proper and lawful steps to achieve this permit to build on his property. I just think that it wouldn't be unreasonable. And as a fellow Cicero resident and a neighbor, we're talking about 6 feet overall here. I don't think visually or that there would be any other adverse effect granting him to build at that 24 feet. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Anyone else?
How you doing? My name is Mark Ryder. How you doing? I live on 7936 Ronaldo Boulevard West in Bridgeport. Yes, I come from Bridgeport. Scary out there. I live in the swamp. I deal with mosquitoes. I don't know what to tell you. I guess I know I'm the brother. I work at National Grid, so everybody knows. But, you know, just to cover a couple concerns, because I'm there and I've kind of seen a lot when I go out doing work. A fence around the utilities, I think was asked, or shrubbery, that can't actually be accomplished. The pool heater does exhaust out unless we want to catch it on fire, and then I'm pretty sure Lakeshore will be mad at me if we try to do that. Then you got the utilities underlying, and the utility company does need to get to them. So I just want to kind of angle that so you guys are aware, like, that is kind of a major aspect of that. We can't really have that blocked in any sort of fashion. I think everybody has already said everything. I mean, 72 inches, I guess, is what the argument is over. You know, as far as the shed being too big, I just have a quick question. Anybody over, you know, he's been here previous to this. Anybody drive over there? Drive that way?
Yes.
When you make that first right in, is everybody seeing the property to your right when you first drive in?
Mhm.
I mean, they have a whole entire house that you guys would have had to have approved at some point. I believe that was a major building back there. What he's asking for is tiny compared to that. Anybody seen it? Or maybe get a chance to go back over and look. But they have their pool and they have an entire shed behind it that's a livable house back in there.
We've all been there and. I
You've
mean,
probably
Steve,
seen it
I
then when
don't-
you drive to
I
the
don't know
right.
if you can speak to that, Steve, but I was not present when that was.
I think
Oh, it's
he's-
still there.
I think he's referring to the pool house. as
Oh, no, I
another
know,
property.
I
Yeah,
know
okay.
exactly the one
Yeah,
that's being
It
talked
was
about.
built many years ago and it met the building setbacks.
Yeah.
So there wasn't a variance required for that.
I'm just wanting to point that out. I mean, if we're talking too big of a building, I'm not talking whatever variances or anything. I didn't just pointing that out. It's
Right,
not.
but just to pause that a second, I believe what Mr. Procopio was saying was that there was not a variance required for this because the land was big enough to be able to support a structure like that.
Yeah. And I think the land's big enough. If you've been over there, the only problem is the drainage. I mean, unfortunately for him, I guess you just can't fill it and call it a day and put in a drainage pipe. I live in Bridgeport. They did that everywhere. They put in a culvert drainage in and solved all the issues. I guess in this area you can't, so I would just, you know, going for my own perspective, I would go for just looking at it as, you know, if you're trying not to have kids run around it, you're trying to be safe about it. I like
guess-
the idea that we originally had of trying to maybe
I
do something where it's a little
I guess
closer.
we're saying, but we're saying the land's not big enough, right? Because exhibit.
Oh,
A
it's
and-
definitely big.
Exhibit A and B
You're not
showed us meeting the setbacks and the comment was there wasn't enough space for.
going
Green
going
space.
towards the house is
Right.
where the land wasn't big enough.
Correct. Right.
Going towards the house, because then you end up, if you walk out the
Right.
back door, you're at the shed.
Yeah, I just want to make, you
Yeah.
said there was enough space. I just want.
Yeah, going backwards towards the easement is what I'm mentioning, not going the other way around. Because if you walk in his backyard, you'll be right there.
Right.
So if you try to give that a little extra space, I mean, it's not a crazy amount. And a lot of the structures I've seen as I drove around are all within, you know, they're at least facing the main building. And they all look decent versus cocked or at different angles and stuff. Cause I figured you guys wouldn't like it like Bridgeport where we have them wherever they are. I think his overall design is a good one. Hope you guys really take it into consideration. And I just want to mention about the utilities, because that would not work. Putting a fence around just,
Couldn't do a chain link fence.
no, not right there. Only because if you looked at it, all the rest of the fencing, he'd have to pay for some crazy fence to go in right there. I tell you, just from personal experience, it would look horrible.
We'll wait till Mr. Ryder comes back up, but I don't understand how having the shed where it is mitigates a safety concern of people walking behind the shed and into the utility.
Well, you'd be walking between everything right there. If it's back up far enough, they're gonna have to walk all the way around, and the kids won't be able to really get back there. And that's kind of our point, is to have it that close is gonna kind of make it so they don't
We'll
get
wait
back
till he
there.
comes back up because I
Okay.
don't understand the point.
Okay. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Would anyone else speak for this? Don't be shy. Come on up.
Not shy. Hello, everyone. I am James Ryder. Live at 7961 Vernon Road South, Cicero 13039. I'll be quite upfront. I am Greg's dad. And I am grandfather to his 6-year-old boy, 3-year-old boy, and 1-year-old boy. They are very active. And the last thing I want to see is them getting caught in those utilities. When Greg was coming up for the design of this shed, we discussed it quite a bit over the summer for different reasons. And one of the primary concerns I had as we looked at this was preventing the children from running around, getting into those utilities. I'm also a retired National Grid employee, so I've been to many safety training sessions. No, you can't put in a fence there. To put in a fence, you have to drive posts. You got a good chance you're going to hit electrical or gas utilities driving in posts. Bushes, not going to cut it because, as my older son pointed out, it restricts access to those utilities, and you need free access. If anything's to happen where you have to turn off the electricity to the pool or turn off the propane shutoff valve, you have to have immediate and ready access to those utilities. So I'm speaking from the grandfather side. My concern is for my grandchildren. His original design takes into account keeping them safe and guests. Greg and his wife are very fortunate. They have numerous friends, as we've shown tonight. Some of them have come. He has parties over his pool and they have kids. And the last thing we want to see is anybody injured because we couldn't make a 6-foot variance. My gosh. I live over in Hiller Heights, and right behind me is Deerfield Lane development. Don't know the house number, not going to get into it. There is not a shed, there is a barn on this gentleman's property that he constructed last year. It's a 2-story barn. It's huge. I don't know if that ever came before this barn, the board here, but this thing's huge. His neighbors, I'm amazed, didn't complain. None of Greg's neighbors are complaining about this shed being there. I think they see it as a nice addition, and they are guests of his when he has people over. So I don't know who's come and complained about this. No one that I know of. Behind his yard is forest. It's the easement for drainage, as Mark mentioned. I don't see where aesthetically, environmentally, we're not making impacts. In fact, Greg has done a great deal to try and improve the look of the forest behind him, getting rid of dead trees. Again, I can't see a difference, 6 foot versus 4 foot versus 3 foot. We're not talking a huge amount of space. The size of the shed, again, I've lived in Cicero since 1985. I've seen much larger sheds. I've seen much smaller sheds. The size is all relative, depending on the needs of the resident of that domicile. Where is the impact to the community on this? That becomes my question. To me, again, it's the safety of my grandchildren. And at that, I'll leave it to Greg. Come back up here if there are more questions. If there are any questions for me, please.
No, I think we're good.
Thank you.
All right, so the other part of this is, do we have anyone who would speak against this? I'm taking the absence of anyone saying that to be a no. So with that, I will close the public hearing.
I'd like to have Mr. Ryder come back up. I need to understand the safety issue.
Go right
So
ahead.
I don't, explain to me how the proposed shed in the location prevents anybody from getting into the utilities.
Keeps it from a functional area where, functional space where people would try and play. If we go to, let's try looking at some exhibits here from a
But,
picture
the
view.
but the notion of people still being able to walk back there is still there then, right?
As far as being able to physically walk to it,
Sure.
yes,
Right,
as
'cause
as
there
my
was
dad
a
said,
couple
there has to
concerns
be,
about-
and that's
yeah.
where we're trying to, again, enclose that space.
Yeah, but
The-
there was
the
a couple
mulch space will
concerns,
be
right,
the
right.
primary.
But there's a
access
couple
point from
concerns about
that
kids
view.
getting into there, walking in there, whatever, regardless of any design, someone can walk into there.
Somebody could physically walk in
Right.
there, but the
So-
goal is trying to create a
But-
safe.
But we talked about safety. There's nothing preventing anybody from walking into there without some sort of fence, screening, whatever.
Versus creating a space that would facilitate it, I think are two different answers there. As far as can it be physically accessed? Yes.
Yes.
Is it creating a space that would allow somebody to try and do any sort of activity there? No, it was intended so I can fit the mower and
Yeah.
keep it to an accessible space.
Right, but the point is someone can still get over there, right?
Right, but that isn't what we're talking about as far as creating, if we were to follow to, is enhancing and unnecessarily creating that space that we've talked through.
So the one thing that Mr. Robbie is getting at that, if we didn't explain this at the last meeting, I apologize for this, but along with the impacts to the community, there's also the concept of, are we approving the minimum required variance to be able to accomplish what you want? And that is, that's one of the primary overriding things that we look at. And if you go back through minutes, you'll hear one of us parrot that issue. Obviously, the other considerations that were brought up are important, and they're one of 5 factors that we consider. But the alternatives piece, the minimizing, I think is where a few of us are getting hung up on. And when you see Mr. Robbie or Miss Luckett push a little bit on these issues, that's why. And I know you're looking for a set number from us, but this is really it's not an all or nothing thing here. Would 26 feet work? Would 28 feet work? Somewhere in between the 30 and the 24? I don't know what everybody else's thoughts on this are.
I think specifically because there's an easement behind it, I have no issue with where it sits in exhibition C,
Which is the no
or I'm sorry, exhibit C.
exhibit C.
If there wasn't that width of an easement back there, it would be more of an issue for me. But with the width of the easement, I'm not seeing an issue.
What do you guys think?
I guess the grandfather wore me down.
They tend to sometimes.
No, I'm buying into the argument that it will squeeze down the area, that the kid would want to go in and make a little fort in or something, And I guess I'm being swayed by that argument.
Are we at a point where somebody wants to make a motion, or do we need to talk about this more? How are we feeling?
We'll let you make the motion, Chuck.
Don't let me do it. Make the motion. So just to recap this. we're gonna go as posted
Sounds like it.
and everybody has their own ideas of what we're doing here, so I will go through the 5 factors. Everybody gets to say their piece and then we'll do an up or down vote. All right. So with that, I would like to make a motion. Before I make that motion for Gregory Ryder, I'd like to cover the 5 factors that we need to address before we grant such a motion. So the first is whether an undesirable change would be produced in the character of the neighborhood or a detriment to nearby properties would be created. The answer is no, because and I just want to make sure I'm getting the right plan set here. So I'm going to put that to the side. The proposed structure would be located behind a fence in a rear yard where a 10-foot offset from the side property line exists. When you're ready.
Agree.
Agreed.
Agree.
I agree.
Second is whether the benefit sought by the applicant can be achieved by some method feasible for the applicant to pursue other than the area variance. And this is where I want everybody to speak their minds. My opinion on this is yes. There are some other alternate locations I believe this shed could be placed that would be a compromise between what's presented here and some of the options that the applicant presented tonight.
I mean, agree. I mean, we've shown a couple tonight. We've talked about potential compromise. Didn't seem to be too much interest in that, but remember our goal is to approve the minimum variance. So I agree.
Agreed.
Mr. Vick?
I agree, but I also hold by my previous statement that with the width of the easement, I don't see this variance as substantial as it could be if there were properties behind it. So I do agree that there are alternatives, but I also believe this variance is minimal enough so it shouldn't halt this process from moving forward.
Mr. Case?
I agree with Mr. Stanton's summary of this, and I think that there are alternatives. However, based on the applicant's desire to achieve the aesthetic that he wants, this seems to be what you want to move forward with.
And I will add a second note that this was definitely above and beyond what we usually ask for. So thank you for doing that. And does show a willingness to at least try and compromise. Whether the requested area variance is substantial, in my opinion, that's yes. We're looking at a 6-foot variance, which is 20% of the required 30 feet. Even taking into account that there is a drainage easement there, again, there could potentially be some other options that reduce that.
Agree, substantial.
I would agree.
Mr. Vick?
No, I agree, it's substantial, but it shouldn't stop the process from moving forward.
I agree 20% is substantial.
And I would just add that no one of these factors in and of themselves are a reason for denying a variance. It's everything in its totality. So I hope the board considers that as we move along. Fourth is whether the proposed variance will have an adverse effect or impact on the physical or environmental conditions in the neighborhood or district. My answer to that is no. Honestly, this structure is going to be tucked away in the applicant's rear yard, protected by trees in the back, the fence on one side. As a matter of fact, it may not really be viewable from the street at all. Not to mention that the town will be forcing them to or requiring them to solve any drainage issues that this creates.
Mr. Raffia?
I agree, no adverse impacts.
Ms. Luckett?
I agree.
Mr. Vick?
Agree.
Mr. May?
I agree.
Okay. Then whether the alleged difficulty was self-created. I know there's been some back and forth on this, but the answer to this is Almost always yes, and in this case, it is yes also. The applicant is choosing to build an accessory structure that does not provide the required 30-foot rear yard, although this is not necessarily a reason to deny the variance.
Mr. Robia.
I agree.
Agreed.
Mr. Beck.
Agree.
Mr. May.
I agree.
So with that, I'll make a motion on behalf of Gregory Ryder of 8874 Lombardi Drive in Cicero, New York, to allow a proposed 18 by 20 accessory building where the rear yard setback is 24 feet and where a minimum distance of 30 feet is required. Do I have a second?
Second.
When you're ready, please call the roll.
Mr. Robia.
No to the motion.
Yes to the motion.
Mr. Beck.
Yes to the motion.
Mr. Gaines.
Yes, to the motion.
No to the motion. Motion carried. Congratulations.
Thank you. Appreciate the board's time.
Thank you.
Thank you for doing the extra work. We appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Mike, how you doing?
Please bear with me as we reorganize after this.
I thought.
All right, sorry for the delay on that. Our second case tonight is for a property on 8864 Beach Road. The owners are Nancy and Jerry Dennis. Whoever is doing this, please come up and address the board.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Jerry Dennis, owner with my wife of the property. Just a couple of notes of kind of how we got here is, we bought the property, we demoed the house and then pursued a new building. And, we had the architect, design it to meet all the setbacks and what have you. Then when we submitted it for the building permit, it was properly flagged by your workers here, that it was into the setback in the front of the house. So we recognized that, and actually we said in the interest of trying to get this thing built without a lot of delay, we basically went back to the architect and said, okay, we can't do this. And she amended the plans and incorporated steps. And this is on the front of the house. This is on the street side of the house. Just so you know that we didn't do this as a slight on our folks here in the town, is they approved the building permit, and then the contractor got the original prints. So what happens is the thing gets framed, and of course I'm not keeping an eye on it. I've got too many other things to do, but and I apologize for that, but so all of a sudden there's a roof coming off the front of the building. So okay, so we go back to our folks at the town, and they said, listen, and I just want you to understand, we didn't do this to fly in the face of the town. We well appreciate what you folks have to administer. So what we did was we said, okay, how do we rectify this? And one solution was take the roof down, which as you can see, would just not serve any purpose, or apply for a variance. And that's what brought us to this. We stopped any construction on it. But as I say, the roof is still there and propped up and what have you. And, we were going to, pursue, but in the haste of trying to get the building up, we were going to come before you folks and say, okay, we'd like to get a roof, for a lot of reasons, safety and everything else over the steps and what have you. So we're left with a roof that's on the structure. It's, as I understand, 3 or 3.5 foot into, the setback from the middle of the road, I guess. I think, my wife, she's a heck of a photographer. She's a great dentist, but, she's a heck of a photographer too. So I think she tried to give you, an understanding of where we are by her pictures. And, both properties on both sides of us, are well into the setback. And this would do nothing to obscure their, I don't know, vision or visual of the street or whatever. There is pretty much, we would gutter that and direct the water out of there. And, as we're aging a little bit, because we're in a floodplain. So we have to live by the, finished floor levels that are higher than your traditional house and what have you. So we have this, there are gonna be several steps. It's not just your typical 1 or 2 up and you're in the house. So that, yes, you can see there, with the flood vents, and all that stuff. So as you can see, it's a little bit, I think it's probably 4 steps up, and, we'd like at least a landing there. So when you get to the top, you can put your groceries down and what have you. And, as I said, we're getting older, so, we might need an escalator in there or something someday, but, so that's really it. And, again, I want to emphasize you folks did flag that. We did go back to the architect and say, hey, and we redid that, and, something in the shuffle of things.
Yes, say it one more time. What happened? Because I wasn't sure I understood. So say it one more time. What happened? You had a plan.
Planned, yep.
They cited the building.
Yep.
Did the plan always have the porch on the front of it?
The original plans had the porch on the front of it.
Okay.
And then when we submitted it, they flagged it as, wait a minute, you're into the.
Oh, and then the
Then we
construction
went
just
back-
got ahead of everything.
Yes, then we went back to the architect.
Okay.
And the architect redid, I actually took I think a foot or whatever off the house or whatever, but redid it and with steps. To get in, and I believe those were within the setback. And then the framer and the builder got the original prints that showed the original, entrance, which you're looking at some of it. And that's really how this thing, the evolution of it.
Is that how you see it in the codes office as well, Steve?
My understanding is Mr. Dennis is correct. The original plans showed a porch that didn't meet the building setback. The plans were revised to show a stoop and entry stairs, which are allowed by the zoning ordinance
Right.
to enter house and encroach into the required front setback.
Okay.
And then he explains how that the roof got.
Turned
up.
into the roof.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, so we could rip it down to be compliant, but, and we were gonna probably come here anyway and ask for your consideration of putting a roof over those steps once. But we, again, in the urgency of trying to get the house built, before the lake levels go up and do all that stuff, that's what, got us here.
So is this roof that is in this picture, the projection of that is 6 feet?
Yes.
That is the actual finished roof that will be there?
Yeah, yeah.
So-
It's 5 steps, right? Looks like it's 5 steps
I
up.
think so.
So ultimately, you're gonna have a 16-foot wide landing? Is that what you're gonna do? And then will the steps be 16 feet wide too, or will the steps be narrower?
I think, no, I think the way they design that is it'll come up then to a landing and then
Okay.
up. So it's a jog, right? Or does it come straight up? Sorry. Yeah, better than the ladder.
Will the porch be enclosed or will it be open? What's your vision?
It'll be open.
So I will say from a weatherproofing standpoint, having a roof over that really is ideal.
Oh, yeah.
I know from firsthand experience that even exterior doors like that are not waterproof without an overhang on them.
Right. And as I say, it's, the neighbors, actually several of them came and said, geez, anything we can do to help you? And I didn't really think to burden them or you would, but it's not intrusive to them at all. And frankly, it kind of spruces up the decor of the house, I think, when it's finished, but, with the floodplain, it's extensive trying to get up into the house. And as I say, a landing or bigger platform to do that would be probably just easier for us or what have you.
I went over there the other day in the rain and I saw a significant amount of standing water on the left-hand side of the house.
That is my neighbor who has all their downspouts going into that little pocket right there.
It just doesn't drain back to the lake or to the
Well,
street.
the way, when they built that house way back 10 years ago or so, I mean, if you stood there and looked towards the lake, there's no way that water can march up the grade that they have. And then, where the creek is, where the water should go, is the same thing, as the grade is like this. So, for many years, certainly before I bought the property, those downspouts were all designed to dump into that hole right there. And I talked to the neighbor and I said, maybe we should talk about an excavator or get a DPW person in there, because there's pinch points on Beach Road where they flood. And it's mostly, as I understand now, water coming up out of the wetland to get to the lake. So if it can't get there, then you'll see that flooding down there, which hasn't been bad this year for all the downpours that we've had and what have you. But so that's really the complication with that. And I've encouraged them to move his downspouts to the other side where it would just simply go into the creek and we would have none of that standing water. But so far, I haven't been able to do much with that. But it's from the downspouts. If those downspouts weren't there, we wouldn't be talking about that mess that's right there.
So while it's not necessarily material to this specific variance request, the town did receive an email complaint from the neighbor along with some pictures showing the standing water, maybe even more than you saw. Steve, I'm assuming that, and again, this has nothing to do with the porch variance. So we're gonna talk about this and we're gonna put a pin in it and we're gonna move on. Steve, has an actual drainage complaint been filed for this yet?
Not as of yet, no.
Okay, but it's a true characterization that as the town is going towards providing a certificate of occupancy for this structure, that if one of our codes people sees that this build out is contributing to any of that will be required to be corrected before.
That's correct.
Okay.
As Mr. Dennis explained, one of the reasons that we ask or require that although the home has to be elevated to meet the flood hazard design standards, we ask that the grade necessarily does not. That's why Mr. Dennis has to have more steps to get in his home so that he grades appropriately, handles all his stormwater within his property boundaries and not convey to neighboring properties. And that will be part of what we're looking for while this house is built.
And there's some of this conversation that's between you and I, and there's some that's between me and the board. And that was definitely something that's between me and the board, just so that they all understand where the situation
I
is.
understand, but may I inquire, you received an email about, from a neighbor?
Yeah, we received an email, and I believe it's as you're looking at your house, the neighbor to your left, along with some photos.
I believe his email was a response to his notification of the variance.
Yes.
Because a contiguous property owner would have been notified. That's the first I had heard about his concern as well. So we hadn't had a chance. to
He's
look into
raising
it
a
yet.
concern about the water?
Yes.
It's his downspouts that are putting all that water right
And
there.
all
So-
all I'm saying to you,
Well,
is that
wait a minute, I'm
regardless-
just telling
I'm
you,
saying
I'm
to you,
living by the
sir,
flood
sir,
vents and all that
sir.
stuff. And I've got pictures for 3 years
sir,
of
I
where that house is right there.
sir, if
it
you
was
let
a
me
pond.
finish, I can probably put a pin in this and we can just move on.
I got you.
I went to Google Street View, and in Google Street View, you're able to go back year on year on year on year, and I could see evidence of ponding in that driveway.
Mhm.
Now, again, I'm going to say this for the last time. This is not material
No, no,
to this variance. So we have now put a pin in it
No,
to move on.
I understand, but like I say,
I
is it's
completely understand
disturbing
and
to me that,
sympathize.
that the solution to that pond and that standing water that you witnessed, all right, is not coming from my property. I'm guttered,
Mm.
all right? All mine is, my water is going where it should be. The guy that built that house, all right, intentionally put those, and he intentionally graded it that way. And the person that owned that house before me lived with a pond in his front yard and nobody did anything about it. Okay,
No,
so
I-
it's corrected now.
And I
But-
truly consider all of us fortunate that. we don't
Gotcha,
have
I'm
to
sorry.
address
I
that.
just, I know it's a sidebar, but as you can see, I get a little irritated that he's got the audacity to say that I'm of some, you know.
I apologize in advance for any
Whatever,
eventual confrontations that
Yeah.
occur because of this.
She shut you down.
yeah, sorry.
Sorry.
Well,
All right.
welcome to my world.
Okay, what else, guys, what else do we have?
I'm good.
Okay, so with that, I will open the public hearing. Would anyone speak for this? Would anyone speak against this? At this time, I will close the public hearing. Are there any other further questions? Okay, with that, would someone like to cover the 5 factors and
I can do
look it? Go ahead.
So factor number 1, whether an undesirable change would be produced in the character of the neighborhood or detriment to nearby properties would be created. I said no. Many of the houses on Beach Road, since they are small lots, encroach into the front yard setback, and the house just to the south of you is only at about 16 feet.
Mr. Robbie?
Agree.
Agree.
James?
I agree.
I agree.
Number 2, whether the benefit sought by the applicant can be achieved by some method feasible for the applicant to pursue other than the area variance. I said no, because the elevation of the house, any covered front porch added at this time would encroach and would require an area variance.
Mr. Robbie?
I agree.
Mr. Vick?
Agree.
Mr. Mays?
I agree, and like I said, I think it's better for the home to have that above that door.
Mr. Stanton?
I agree.
Number 3, whether the requested area variance is substantial. I said no. He's requesting an additional 3.7 feet, which is 12%. I don't see that as substantial.
Mr. Robbie?
I agree.
Mr. Vick?
Agree.
Mays?
I agree.
I agree, but please don't take that as a 12% across the board is not substantial. I do agree with that, though.
Number 4, whether the proposed variance will have an adverse effect or impact on the physical or environmental conditions in the neighborhood or district. I said no.
Mr. Robbie?
I agree.
Mr. Vick?
Agree.
Mr. Mays?
I agree.
I agree.
And whether the alleged difficulty was self-created, yes, the applicant is choosing to add a non-conforming front porch.
Mr. Robey?
I agree.
Mr. Beck?
I agree.
Mr. Mays?
I agree.
I agree, but I would also add that that's not necessarily a reason to deny the variance tonight.
So I'll make a motion on behalf of Nancy Dennis, who is the owner of 8864 Beach Road. I make a motion to approve an area variance where the applicant is requesting permission to construct a 6-foot times 16-foot covered porch having a front yard setback of 26.3 feet, where a minimum distance of 30 feet is required.
I'll second the motion.
Mr. Robey?
Yes to the motion.
Yes to the motion.
Mr. Beck?
Yes to the motion.
Mr. Mays?
Yes to the motion.
Yes to the motion. Motion carried. Congratulations.
Thank you very much, all of you.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
He was worried he was.
Stay
gonna
out
be
of
here
trouble,
for an
sir.
hour. That's great. That's great.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
I'm sorry, I just have to apologize.
we just-
that
we-
My paperwork was not as extensive as the guy before me.
Doesn't
Good
have
luck.
to be.
Oh, no, I need it for my husband. I was feeling like, didn't do them.
Nope, you're
No, it's
fine.
Good, you're good.
As evidenced by the fact that you're walking out of here with it. So
Yes,
No.
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Bye.
thank you.
Oh, okay. So our third case for tonight is a property on 5793 West Pine Grove Road. The owner is Larry Fredsel. Mr. Fredsel, if you'd come up and address the board, please. Good evening.
I guess how you doing? Thank you for taking your time to look at this today. I'm Larry Fretzel. I'm the owner of this property on West Pine Grove Road. Back last December, I think was the time I had this shed built. I believe the contractor did obtain a permit to build this shed. And when I came back and Mr. Johnstone came by and let me know that the shed was not built to code. I talked to him a little bit when I came back here and I was like, hey, what can we do? You know, I don't want to take the shed down and move it because that will kind of really disturb the structural integrity of the shed if you're taking it apart and putting it together a few times. Also to get the machinery in there to move it as one piece would dig up my yard. I'd have to take part of the fence down to do it. So I was just coming here to see if there was a way, if I can get a variance to move that 10 feet to 5 feet from the side, as it is 5 feet also from the rear, which is allowable. I was just seeing if there was something we can do to get that variance.
So you, or at least I'm implying from what you said that you were considering the undertaking of moving the
I
shed.
wouldn't, I would have the contractor do
Okay.
it.
And I just want to make sure that, well, I mean, it's between you and your contractor, but if a contractor made a mistake like that, I would be looking for them to.
So I understand that, but I don't know if they're going to have to take the shed down. It's a kind of like an assembled unit. So they'll have to disassemble it and reassemble it. But once you do that, I don't know if you guys have ever worked on those kind of things before. They're not always the greatest materials. So if you start taking things apart, they don't go back together as you would expect them to.
Did they roll it on pipe?
They may, I'm not exact, but getting that equipment in there to get that, to lift that up, I don't know if I'd be able to get that into my yard without A, digging it up, or B, taking part of the fence down. I feel like a more straightforward path may be to get a variance. I feel like that would save a lot of people a little bit of work, or manual labor work. And I was really just, I'm not sure of the process to do that. So that's why I'm here today.
So that gets to another question that I had is, it sounds like this is on a stone pad and not on footings.
It is not on footings, correct?
Go ahead.
No, it's on stone. I mean, I looked.
I mean, I looked at it today, yeah.
It
looks
is,
like
yeah, it's on stone.
Sometimes we've been surprised, though.
True.
I have kind of an off-topic comment or question. Your fence,
I, yeah, that was there when I bought the house like that. I didn't move it, but
that's where it was.
that's where it was.
And that shed isn't on your property.
That shed is it's not, I wouldn't even call it a shed. It's like a plastic cabinet. I can put that wherever. I just have it in the corner because that's the easiest place to put it if the fence is already there. But that's not the shed that I'm talking about today.
Oh, I know.
Okay. I'm happy to discuss that part separately, but if for today.
Just a question.
Okay, yeah, I don't know how it got built like that, but when I bought the house, my lawyer did bring it up to me. I mean, it was my first house. I was excited. I'm like, okay. It's kind of a deal with it when I deal with this sort of thing, but if that's something I need to do, that's okay too, but
Usually, I'm not gonna speak for you, I guess. Usually, they would, if you were gonna rebuild the fence or repair it, they might make you move it. Is that the same? as Cicero?
That's correct. Yeah, this
Okay.
probably was erected long before permits were required and
yeah, it is an old fence, but
So your shed contractor built it built it in place? Is that what, they didn't drop off a completed shed? They didn't roll?
no, they did not. They built it there.
And you went back to him, or he told you it was too close, or you told him it was?
So Mr. Johnstone, I believe, reported it back to the contractor.
Okay.
And they came to me, say, hey, what do you want to do? I came here to speak to
Okay.
code enforcer, and
So they're,
was like,
they're
"Ah,
fully, they're
there's a couple
fully
things
ready
we
to
can do."
move the shed if they need to.
I may have to do some landscaping to move that gravel pad and all that kind of stuff though too, but
I mean, I think let's play the game that if the shed wasn't there, what would we do, right?
put it in the right place.
I would have it in the right place, yeah.
Right.
Any other questions at this point? Because I'll move on to the public hearing and we can continue. All right. So this time I will open the public hearing. Would anyone speak for this? Would anyone speak against this? Okay, at this time I will close the public hearing. What other questions?
may I ask just a question, just for my own education? I don't mean to be confrontational with this.
No, you're fine.
But the 10-foot setback, what is the purpose to have? To me, it feels like a lot of space, just looking at it, like a lot of unused space. I'm just curious why.
Steve, can I put you on the spot?
Sure.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to.
All of the zoning districts have somewhat similar, but in some cases, different building setbacks. It's for uniformity of development, essentially, right? Your home can't be any closer than 10 feet to the side property boundary. That same thing applies to an accessory building. You get relief at the rear in the zoning ordinance for a building 192 square feet or less. So.
Okay.
But
So why-
it doesn't convey to the side. It only gives you that relief at the rear property
Okay,
boundary.
so why is it different from from rear to side? Maybe this isn't the venue for this, but.
That's a question we had to ask when the ordinance was put into place, and I don't
Yeah,
know the
okay, all right.
answer.
I was just curious.
But
just-
These are things that we're looking at today, though, that may be changing in the future.
Okay, yeah,
Yes.
as an engineer, I am curious as to the whys a lot of the time, so.
My conjecture, if I was going to make the shed side yard the same as the home side yard, is that it would tuck the structures somewhat behind the house, so they're not necessarily visible from the street when you're looking dead on.
That's a good
Okay.
point. Yeah.
And again, it is like Mr. Procopio said, it is a uniformity thing. It's
Sure.
understanding that the codes change over time. It's something that, yes, from this point forward, we're trying.
Yeah, I guess my question was just why it's different from the rear to the side and why that's different. And that
Understood.
was really my only question there, sorry.
Okay. No worries. No worries.
Do we want to give him a chance to go back to his contractor and say,
Yes,
move the shed before we
yes.
make a
Well,
rule?
yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, the shed's there. It's not hurting anybody at the moment, right? I mean,
yes. And where Mr. Rabia is going is that, as you heard us during the first case, our charge is to approve the minimum necessary
Mhm.
variance. And I understand the shed's there now, but when we look at these things, we have to look at it as if it's not
Sure.
there. So to me, I would say that if you were coming in front of me and you had this, what I think is a wide open backyard and you're asking me to do this, I would say, well, no, we're gonna stick with
Sure.
we'll stick with the 10-foot. The way that would proceed is that this would be a denial and then all sorts of things happen up to and including you may have to take down the shed. So, what Mr. Robbie is saying is that we can defer this to the next meeting. Give you the chance to talk to your contractor and see if they want to move it. If that's the case and they agree to move it, Steve, I'm thinking we may not even have to come back here.
And if they can't move it, then I come back and tell you guys that and you deny me anyway.
If there's a substantive reason why they can't move it, I think we would take that under, at least I would take that under consideration. I can't speak for everybody else.
Okay.
Okay.
I feel bad. It's an unfortunate situation for you.
Yeah, that's why I came in. I wanted to see if there was a way we can do that. It makes, I feel like a few people's lives a little bit easier just to,
Yeah. And it sounds like this was something that was out of.
yeah, I came home and it was there,
Right.
So,
Okay. So with that, I'm going to make a motion to defer this case until our, I'm also going to leave the public hearing open. So if you could note that, because I do have to leave it open. So I'll make a motion to defer this to our October 7th meeting. Do I have a second?
I'll second the motion.
I reopen the public hearing. Thank you.
I'll second it.
Mr. Rabia, when you get a chance or when you're ready, please call the roll.
Yes, to the motion.
Yes to the motion.
Yes to the motion?
Yes to the motion.
Yes to the motion.
Aye.
All right, we'll see you next month.
all right, thanks guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay, our next meeting is scheduled for Monday, October 7th. Is there 7th?
I saw it too. I was like,
Does anyone else have any other business before the board?
No.
So there being no other business before this board, do I have a motion to adjourn?
motion to adjourn.
Second?